Sports shape lives, build communities, and drive billion-dollar industries. Yet their true impact often goes unnoticed.
From personal growth and well being to career potential, it's time to rethink what sports can do. This is the Why Not Sports podcast. Welcome to the Why Not Sports podcast, a podcast where we dive into the business and community side of sports. Today, we are super honored to have Aaron Miller. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Aaron Miller is an investor at Will Ventures, a venture capital firm specializing in the sports and entertainment sectors. He joined the firm in July 2024 after earning his MBA from Stanford Graduate Business School. Before his tenure at Stanford, Aaron gained valuable experience at the MBA, where he focused on the league's strategy, marketing, content, and partnerships in Latin America. He also held positions at Endeavor, supporting the chief creative officer in consulting projects, and at Netflix, contributing to the finance and strategy team. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, super excited. Super excited to have Will Ventures on, Aaron. And I guess the first question we'd love to ask is, Aaron, what's your sports story?
Yeah, definitely a circuitous route. So I was born in Montreal, but grew up between New York and DC, and really never thought I'd work in sports. I was always a huge fan. I actually painted my room purple and gold for the Lakers when I was a kid. None of my family was from LA, but because everyone was from Montreal, no one in my family really liked basketball. And I just got obsessed with Shaq and Kobe. So I painted my room purple and gold, played basketball, watched basketball all the time, played and watched everything under the sun, really, but never saw myself working in the sports industry. I thought I'd work in politics or journalism for most of high school and college. So I went to Harvard undergrad to study government and spent most of my time working for the school newspaper and doing internships in that space, and got to the end of college and realized I wasn't so sure I wanted to work in politics or journalism, but definitely did want to do something I was passionate about. And that kind of led me to sports. I had loved sports my entire life, but never knew what it would look like to work in the industry. And so I was fortunate enough to get an internship at the NBA at the end of college. And I'd spent time living in Argentina and studying Spanish in college. And I saw the NBA had a group that did their business development in LATAM. So everything from the media to sponsorship deals to events like the Mexico City games. So I ended up getting that first internship experience at the NBA. Absolutely loved it. Found not just sports interesting, but the sports business very interesting.
Yeah.
And so realized, all right, I'm going to try to make a career in this space. And so I got my first job in sports at Endeavor, the talent agency, out of college, spent a year there. And then I had the chance to go back to the NBA and spent 3 years there working on their LATAM business, and got to touch cool projects like the Mexico City games and a bunch of creator partnerships, and really decided I wanted to be in this industry long term. So after a few years of that, decided to go back to business school and spent the last 2 years at Stanford. And the goal of that was really just to try as many things as possible. So I spent my first year working at an early stage video game startup. I spent my summer at Netflix trying to see like the streamer media company side of things, worked on corporate strategy there. And then my second year, a Stanford grad was starting to advise Lionel Messi on his early stage investments because Messi was
Wow.
just moving to the US. He wanted to do his first few venture deals, kind of like a lot of American athletes had done. So I started to help them out with sourcing and diligence, and really loved this space, like this intersection of sports and startups. I thought it was the coolest intersection in the world, wanted to learn more about it. So spent my entire second year of business school just trying to meet as many startups and also VCs as possible. And around then I met the Will Ventures team, hit it off and joined. And now I'm investing in early stage sports startups. So that is my sports story.
That's awesome, Aaron. And I think for us specifically, when we learned about Will Ventures and when we learned a little bit more about you, we really, I mean, we took a sports, a venture capital class here at Texas A&M, and it was just really, really cool to get to, get your eyes open to the types of industries and investing that there is. But when we learned about Will Ventures, it was like, oh wow, you can actually combine it with sports too. And so one of the best questions that we hear is like, oh, if you were to explain this to a 10-year-old, how would you explain it, right? And so if you were to explain sports venture capital to a 10-year-old kid, how would you explain it, Aaron?
It's a good question. I would say first, it's important to understand just how venture capital works.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's investing in early stage companies, and most are tech companies. So normally the model is buying a minority percentage of a company around inception. So think when it's either just an idea or just starting to get traction, giving the company capital to grow, and then eventually, hopefully, exiting to get a strong return on your investment. And so that's venture capital. And when it comes to sports venture capital, I mean, there are different models to do it, but basically the way we see it is we want to invest in companies that are around sports, entertainment, and consumer. So that could be anything from an emerging sports league to a sports betting company to maybe something around consumer health that might not be just a sports company, but could definitely benefit from athletes as brand ambassadors and leagues as marketing partners. Everyone defines it differently, but I would say that's the high level on sports venture capital.
Nice. So kind of given the dynamic around sports venture capital, given it's highly competitive, highly risky, how does Will Ventures differentiate itself in the market?
So I would say a few things. First of all, is we want to be the best value add partners
Mm.
when it comes to early stage startups in our spaces. We do that in a few ways. First, everyone on our team has some sports or entertainment experience. So, for example, the founding partners of Will Ventures, Brian and Isaiah, um, they were both Harvard football players. Isaiah actually played in the NFL for 8 years. And they met at an early stage wearable startup and helped scale it from seed stage to 100 million in funds raised and then an exit. And then they co-founded Sports Innovation Lab, which is a boutique consulting firm for the sports industry. So their experience is very much as operators and founders around sports. And then we've also been building out our platform team. So a couple of years ago, we brought on a partner from Andreessen Horowitz, and we just brought on another recently. And their job is to support our portfolio companies around go-to-market, biz dev, corp dev. That's what they spend their time doing. And whenever we're not meeting with founders, we're trying to make sure we have connections at the NBA league office, at Netflix, with creators, with athletes, so that we could plug them in with companies when it's helpful. So I would say in some, our goal is to just be really like hands-on and value add around the spaces that we know. And that's how we differentiate.
Gotcha. And where are you guys based out of, Aaron? Like, where are you right now?
So I'm in New York, but we have offices in Boston, and SF also.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and kind of you talked about one of the key differentiators is the value add that you guys can contribute as a team. What would you say your key value add is, kind of having that experience with the NBA, with Netflix, with Endeavor?
Well, I think sports is a really hard industry to break into and build connections around. It's kind of like an insiders club because there are
Hmm.
so many people who are just interested in sports.
Right.
And if you put Adam Silver's email out on the internet, you would have 10 million people emailing him with ideas of how he should run the NBA.
Hmm.
And then a lot of people want to work in this space also. So what you end up having is the industry becomes an insider club where connections are really important, and it's hard to reach someone like the corporate strategy team at the NBA or the agent for a popular athlete. So we make sure we have all of those
Hmm.
relationships, and we really build them over years, and build a lot of trust there. And so that ends up being the differentiator. It's like having those relationships. So when a portfolio company needs an athlete as a brand ambassador, or needs a deal with the league, or needs to reach media and streaming companies, we're often able to plug them in.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
for sure. So kind of another thing that I was able to tell from Will Ventures is kind of an emphasis on finding technology that's within sports, but can have a broader application, kind of dealing with the intersections that sports has between health and wellness, between technology and AI. What has kind of your experience been within that, and what are some projects that you've been able to work on that you think kind of have that nice intersection?
Yeah, I mean, first I would say a company doesn't necessarily need to expand outside sports entertainment to be a
Hmm.
huge outcome. I'll give you a few examples. So, for example, we've invested in a couple emerging leagues. One being Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy's TGL, the Simulator Golf League. They just
Hmm.
launched a few months ago, and then Shaun White's new snowboarding league called the Snow League, that's launching in a few weeks in Aspen. The goal for those properties is to really become household names, like household leagues similar to the NBA and NFL. Um, and so theoretically, those companies wouldn't need to expand outside sports to have a really big impact and gain a lot of enterprise value. I think of sports betting startups too. So you look at FanDuel and DraftKings, those are great standalone businesses and don't necessarily need to expand outside sports. Um, But then there are examples of some that do. So you look at wearable companies like Whoop and Aura. Those very much have expanded from like athletes as the first use cases to people just wanting to take care of their health. So I think it could go both ways. There are multiple strategies. You can invest in sports companies or companies that use sports as a wedge into larger consumer markets. You could also just invest in companies that probably don't need to expand out of sports, but could still get pretty massive.
Yeah. So kind of circling back to the new sports leagues that are being created, how do you think that's reflected upon broader media changes within? I know I read your Substack surrounding how Netflix is evolving their sports platform, and you think that they're pretty well capitalized to take advantage of that. How do you think that that kind of broader media shift is going to benefit newer leagues?
It's a good question. I think everyone is wondering what comes next after big cable deals for sports media, because
Hmm.
these things are locked up in 10-year cycles. So the NBA and NFL in the past couple of years have signed these massive media deals,
Yeah.
mostly, with cable. And the big question is, all right, like cable's declining, streaming is on the up, along with a whole lot of other like ways that people are consuming entertainment. And so people are wondering, like, what will the next NBA and NFL like set of media deals look like? I think everyone agrees streaming is going to have a big role in that. Like Netflix seems to be playing more in live sports. Amazon, all the big cable companies like Paramount and NBC are also investing more in streaming. But then there are like a lot of really interesting new models popping up. You see a lot of emerging sports leagues, like the Kings League, for example, streaming for free on Twitch and YouTube, and then monetizing through sponsorships in video. I think that's a really compelling model.
Hmm.
And then I think everyone's wondering, like, what could we provide on top of just a stream? Because there's so much competition for entertainment these days. There's
Yeah.
like mobile games, there's PC games, there are console games. There is just about like unlimited entertainment
Yeah.
options, it feels like these days. And so 30 years ago, it might have felt like watching an NFL game on TV is like close to the only form of media in town. Now there's a lot more. So I think everyone's wondering, like, what are ancillary revenue streams? What should the second screen experience on your phone look like? What should the complimentary sports betting experience look like? So everyone in the industry is kind of thinking about those things right now.
Yeah. And what's keeping you up at night, Aaron, working for a sports venture capital firm? Like, what's like the thing that's lingering in your head? Like, oh, if we could answer this question, right? Like, we would be so far ahead. Like, what's that for you guys right now?
It's a good question. Um, I would say it's just about trying to meet the best people at the end of the day. This goes for venture capital in general. It's really
Yeah.
about partnering with the best founders. So my the question that keeps me up at night is like, how do I get to meet the best founders in the spaces that we're interested in? And then we need to do our work to understand like where the industry is going. But then it's really just about like meeting the best people who are like putting action against those ideas.
Yeah. And how do you suggest somebody approach that? Um, like wanting to break into the sports industry, right? Like, what is the piece of advice you wish you would have known? I mean, obviously you did a great job and you've, made a killing career out of it. But if you could give an advice to a younger Aaron, who was in high school, who didn't think he would go into sports, what would you tell him that is like the best way to kind of get your foot in the door?
Yeah, I would say two things. I'd say one with the sports industry. It's important just to get experience because I saw a lot of friends in college and even business school kind of like delay getting their first sports experience. It's a hard industry to break into. Sometimes like the pay isn't as good in sports. Sometimes it's harder to find the right opportunity. So I would see a lot of people kind of like delay their entry into the industry. I would just tell my younger self, just like dive in, just start learning. And then the second thing, when it comes to venture capital, you kind of have to start doing the job to land a job in the first place. And the job in venture capital is really finding great companies to invest in. So there are stories of tons of great venture capitalists who really just started by going out to meet startups and then starting to send deals around to partners at VC firms. Or maybe writing a newsletter, just showing that they have like a POV on the space
Mm,
and a value add to offer. And then before you know it, there's a job that opens up at a VC firm, and you've already been doing the job of meeting
right.
a million startups. You could slot right in. I would say those are the two things. And then when it comes to marrying sports and venture capital, it's really just about doing those things in parallel, like getting the sports experience and the VC experience. If you've got both those, you'll be a good candidate to work at any of these firms.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of tying back to something that you said previously, talking about the importance of founders within VC firms, what would you kind of say is a rough weighting you would provide to the importance of the company itself and the business idea and the founder that you're working with directly?
I would say it depends on the stage. Often the earlier you go, I would say the more you end up indexing on the founder. And then the later you go, the more you might index on the fundamentals of the business. And that would be where like growth equity and even private equity place. But at our stages, so pre-seed, seed, Series A, we're indexing a ton on the founder's experience, whether they have a right to win in this space, and really just how much we believe in them to be the ones to back.
Yeah, and so what goes into that, Aaron? Like what goes into, I guess, finding that it factor in like a potential founder, right, for a company that you guys are looking at? Like, do you guys have like sort of filters or standards, or like is it just more of a feel?
A lot of it has to do with previous experience in an industry. It's not easy to start a company in any of these spaces. If we're backing someone starting an emerging league, we probably want some league or large media experience. If we're backing someone starting a sports betting company, it definitely helps to have worked in that space. And so I would say first is experience. That gives you a right to win in the space.
Mhm.
You know what to look for as a founder. You know what your levers are. And then really it's tenaciousness. It's like
Yeah,
the firm is called Will Ventures because for two things. One, a lot of the firm is ex-athletes and it takes like tremendous willpower
for sure.
to be an athlete at the highest levels. And then same thing, it takes insane tenaciousness to start a company from scratch and build it into something big. So really that's the main thing we're looking for.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what's like do you have a favorite like tenacity story of you guys like finding somebody that is tenacious, or maybe even you guys like doing something that, kind of shows that aspect of the business for you guys?
One example is we've been fortunate to back a guy named Nigel Eccles with his new company called BetHog. He was one of the founders of FanDuel and helped build it from zero into a DFS platform into one of the biggest sports betting companies in the world, if not the largest, part of Flutter. And so right now he's pursuing something in the online casino space, and we're super excited about it. But I don't think there could be a better founder to back in the real money gaming space. And you don't build a company like FanDuel without that tenaciousness. And he's bringing
Yeah,
that same mentality to this new company, BetHog. So we're super excited to partner with him.
gotcha.
Yeah, so kind of, I guess, just digging deeper on the topic of betting since you brought it up. With the market being so concentrated between Flutter and DraftKings, what made BetHog stand out? And how did you know, kind of other than obviously the tenacity and the founder, what specific characteristics you think will lead it to be a success?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to sports books in general, it's a pretty saturated space. You
Mhm.
have the FanDuels and DraftKings and some of the like casino incumbents like the MGMs and Caesars who have rolled out their books. And essentially what the markets come down to in the US is just like who got there first and who could spend the most on marketing. So FanDuel and DraftKings have both been spending close to $1 billion a year on marketing.
Yeah,
That's really hard for a new startup to compete with. Think about that. Like to
100%.
spend $1 billion a year, you would have to raise a significant amount of venture capital. So a lot of the attention over the last few years for investors has gone into other categories, like kind of ancillary categories around sports betting. And one of those is online casino platforms. Um, Specifically, a subsect of that is crypto-backed online casino platforms. So if you guys follow Drake on Instagram, you probably see him always posting about his bets
Yeah,
on stake.com. That is a crypto-based online casino and sports book that's grown from zero to I think $2 or $3 billion in revenue in just a few years. But also, if you look at the platform, I think there are a lot of things that could be improved. I think the content, the games could be improved. I think the UI UX and the social experience leave things to be wanted. And so BetHog's goal is to compete in that space. And so we met the founding team, built a ton of conviction in them, and also just the category in general. And so that's how, we decided to invest.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess could you dig a little deeper kind of into the topic itself? Kind of why has there been a general market shift towards the kind of more casino style game rather than the traditional online gambling, which revolved around sports books?
So online casino platforms are a lot higher margin than sports books. Sports books are pretty razor thin margins. And so a lot of books are actually looking to cross sell customers from their sportsbook products to online casinos. And so you see in the few states where it's legal in the US, you see a lot of the sports books actually trying to push their users from their sportsbook products to their online casino products. And so I think that's a theme that's going to continue to evolve, especially as more legalization, comes to more US states and just other countries too.
And do you think that kind of the consistent progress towards legalization is going to continue, or do you believe that potentially there might be some obstacles in the way and maybe some reversals in the future?
So the trend has definitely been towards legalization in the US. It's been slow,
Mhm.
much slower than sports betting, just because I think consumer sentiment was more favorable towards sports betting rather than online casino. But you see Canadian provinces are beginning to legalize. So the first was Ontario. Looks like Alberta is going to be next. Several countries in LATAM have moved in the same direction. I don't think it's going to be like all in once like sports betting was post PASPA, but the
Yeah.
secular shift is definitely towards legalization. That said, there are concerns.
Mhm.
There are always concerns around responsible gambling. And I just think, governments are going to continue to like balance lobbying with like consumer interests. But my bet is legalization continues to shift towards online casinos being more legalized.
Yeah. And Aaron, what's your take on, I guess this year was I remember there were a lot of headlines around a lot of these sports books getting fan friendly outcomes, right? Like I guess like the sports book being a little bit off in terms of like, you know, like I guess favorites being, more likely outcomes or like, I guess like fan favorites, right? So what's kind of your take or what do you think? Like do you think like the consumer like the fan itself is getting smarter at betting? Or do you think there's like something we're missing in the sports industry as a whole?
I think this year was a bit of an anomaly with how NFL games shook out. And so books like DraftKings and FanDuel lost a lot of money based on that. But I think that's just because of variance and probabilities. I don't think it speaks to like the long-term sustainability of the model of being a book.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And I guess time will tell too. I mean, I follow a lot of like I mean not gambling, but like sports gambling podcasts and I mean, I'm a big Colin Cowherd fan, for example, and he always does like a segment with Chad Millman, who's like the CEO of the Action Network, and like every week it'd be like, yeah, like we're 2-4, we're 1-5, or we're like 3-3. So I definitely noticed that as a trend like over the past few years, and what I guess like in transition, like talking about Colin Cowherd and like kind of some of his ventures in like podcasting media and do you think that like, where do you think the sports industry is going in terms of like how we consume like major sports media like ESPN or Fox Sports? Like, do you think we're transitioning into also kind of a bit of the podcasting space, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's crazy to compare what Sports Center looks like right now versus when I was a kid. I would
Yeah,
watch Sports Center as a kid. Like I would just sit on the couch, 10 years old, and watch literal reruns of like Sports Center, and I would watch the same highlights over and over.
yeah.
That's like all I watched.
Top 10 of the
Um,
night.
it's
Yeah, absolutely.
it's funny now, if you turn on Sports Center, you're going to see a ton of betting lines.
Yeah,
You're going to be like, they're going to be reporting on the upcoming Super Bowl, and they're going to be like, the Eagles are favored to win by X, or the Chiefs are favored to win by Y. Um, that's a really interesting change, especially when you think of how many kids are watching Sports
yeah,
Center. But I think overall, there's been a shift away from like cable networks shows, like studio shows, like Sports Center and Colin Cowherd and Stephen A. Smith. These guys, they very much still are like the number one like influencers when it comes to sports media, but the influence has very much shifted to social media and like digitally native creators. You've seen companies
Yeah.
like Overtime pop up, which have created like dozens of digitally native creators. And then you see the people like Stephen A. Smith and Malika Andrews like spending a lot of their time posting, their content on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. And so there's also been like a move away from like TV towards social media, which I'm sure you guys have covered plenty. But it's just been like a total platform shift in where sports fans spend their time and consume content.
Yeah, and kind of within that, one of the key things that we noticed was also a shift more towards kind of athlete empowerment and involvement within branding, within media, within promotion. You can see this kind of within ESPN hires, kind of less emphasis on journalism, more emphasis on kind of entertainment and former athletes getting big names in there to promote the product. Is this something that kind of Will Ventures has noticed, or y'all have noticed, and kind of made any moves towards, or is that kind of just a localized trend within that?
Yeah, we're really bullish on creator-led businesses. You've seen Mr. Beast being far and away the
Yeah.
number one, YouTuber in the world, and he's done an amazing job building up the Feastables brand, building up his merch, and trying out a whole bunch of other things. You've seen Jake Paul with Prime, like the list goes on and on. The D'Amelios as well have built out a suite of brands. We're really bullish on creators as tastemakers. As like distribution hacks for
Mhm.
new businesses. And we spent a lot of time thinking about that space.
Yeah. And do you think there's like a disconnect sometimes, or I guess for an athlete, right? Like, what is the best industry, like the best industry to go into? Like, if you're, is it kind of based on the athlete, based on their brand? I mean, like LeBron, Jordan, like you have like like tequila or like different types of like they'll have their own drink. If you were to advise an athlete that came to Will Ventures and was like, "Hey guys, like I'm super excited about our relationship. Like, love some of the things that you guys are doing. Like, what are some things that I should look into? Like, how would you go about that approaching, like with an athlete? Like, how would you kind of walk them through that process?"
I think for all creators, if you're rolling out some sort of product that's outside of your content, you just have to do something that's authentic to your brand. And for athletes, for the longest time, I mean, let's think of the types of brands that athletes would partner with. They're like shoe companies. So things like Nike and Adidas, which represent peak performance. So it's very easy for Michael Jordan or LeBron to lean into that. It's a Gatorade or Powerade, very similar thing. I think we've seen like a few apparel and athleisure brands started by athletes. And then when it comes to other categories, like thinking tequila and LeBron James, that's okay to move out of like peak performance and athletics, but there just has to be a story there and kind of
Mm.
why you're selling that rather than anyone else.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of the interesting aspect of it is at the end of the day, they kind of use their name, leverage that towards the brand, but then at the end of the day, they want the brand to be able to stand on its own and kind of, 10, 20 years from now, you won't even know it was, their brand. It's kind of just become a mainstay and a staple.
Exactly. And that's something that we look for in creator led businesses also. It's like, how do you build the brand beyond just one individual? Because there's some key man risk with any individual like person being the face of a company.
Yeah.
And also just in terms of growing, like not every single person is going to be a fan of LeBron James, but you might be
Yeah.
able to create like a like legacy brand that attracts a whole lot more people. And he's just kind of the jumping off point.
Absolutely. And Aaron, like kind of touching more to back to you as a sports fan. Do you have a favorite sport? I mean, I know you work with the NBA, you loved the Lakers growing up, and then maybe like a favorite athlete and uh like behind your
I'm a
careers a little bit.
huge basketball fan. Like I would watch any NBA game. I still watch the Lakers a lot. The Luka Doncic news was huge for me. I didn't believe it when I first saw the tweet. Um, I grew up obsessed with Shaquille O'Neal. He was just
Yeah.
the guy for me. And so I think now we're rolling with Luca and LeBron, but I watch everything basketball. I'll watch like high school highlights, college. I'll watch creators on YouTube. I love Jesser, what he's doing
Oh yeah.
with like more kids, teenager, young adult focused content. I watch it all.
Yeah. And I guess you know, the Luka trade was kind of one of those moments when you can reflect and you know exactly what you were doing when it happened. Like, oh, what were you doing when you found out about the Luka trade? It was kind of pretty late for us, and I mean, I'm sure even for you guys. Like, did you wake up to it? Like, where were you when you found out about the Luka trade?
I was coming back from a wedding. And it was like midnight where I was. So I was like, is this real life? Here's a really interesting thing about the Luca trade. It happened a week before the Super Bowl. So theoretically, all of the sports world's attention should have been on like what's going to happen between the Eagles and the Chiefs. But all of a sudden, the week before the Super Bowl, the NBA like stole the attention of the world. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was like, "Did this really happen? I can't believe, what's
Yeah.
going on." And so what you had was like the NBA was dominating the conversation on social media, on podcasts, on like between friends.
Yeah.
But then the NFL was going to dominate conversation that Sunday when it put its Super Bowl on air, and everyone's going to be watching it, and the networks are paying a ton of money to air it. And so I thought something really interesting was happening where like the NBA was capturing the conversation, but not necessarily monetizing it, because the NBA
Hmm.
doesn't really monetize like people posting on social media, people podcasting. And the NFL like wasn't holding the cultural conversation, but you knew on Sunday, no matter what, they were going to make a ton of money by
Absolutely.
airing the Super Bowl. So I think there's an interesting tension there between like cultural influence and dominance, and then also like monetization that I think everyone's like trying to figure out in the sports industry.
Yeah, so kind of tying
Yeah.
back to that and kind of the kind of power dynamics between the different sports leagues. That's a prime example, I think, also recently with the Four Nations occurring at the same time as NBA All-Star Weekend, kind of a similar dynamic there. What do you see as kind of the future for the major sports leagues, and kind of like what are you bullish on? What are you kind of have some concerns on?
I think value will continue to like move towards scarcity. That's something that the NFL has so strong in its model. It's like 17 regular season games every single year. It's a few games a week now, but it's really just Sunday. Everyone is glued to their couch, and it really makes every single game matter. And then you look at something like the MLB, it's an awesome in person product, but it's harder to make the same argument that every single regular season game matters. And there's just so much entertainment out there. It's not
Mhm.
just sports, but it's video games, it's social media. It's like every single option that we have. And so my bet is leagues will continue to move towards these like big cultural moments, like the Super Bowls and what the
Yeah.
NHL is doing with the Four Nations and the NBA in-season tournament. I think it's very important to have these like tent pole events that are bringing like all of fans' attention together. It's really hard to engage people these days over like a long, long regular season.
Yeah, and Aaron, actually, like, let me pass you the ball. Like, you magically replaced Adam Silver today. You're the NBA commissioner. Like, what is the big change you would make to the NBA? Like, if you could just, you know, snap of fingers, or maybe it could take a process, right? But how would you, maybe it could be fixing the All-Star game, but how would you approach, kind of instituting that what you just said into the NBA?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll say I don't want to steal their throne. I'll say something I would like be more curious about as a fan. I grew
Uh-huh.
up playing a lot of NBA 2K, and by no means do I think this is the biggest priority for the NBA. I think the NBA is thinking about like international
Yeah.
expansion, what it does with in-season tournament. There's just something I'd say as a fan. I think NBA 2K is a huge platform for the league where they make some money through royalties. It's not necessarily the biggest revenue driver when you compare it with the media deals, but that's like how a lot of young people who are casual fans are engaging with the game. So I'd be really curious, like, could the NBA integrate more like media content, maybe even live stream games through 2K? You've seen Fortnite do an amazing job of live streaming concerts like through their shooter game. Could the NBA live stream games through NBA
Yeah.
2K? Could they make the game viewing experience more interactive? Could they put more marketing budget against the game with Take Two to get it into the hands of more people? Could they invest in R&D to make the game even more fun for fans? I'd be really curious. I think just as like young people spend more time playing video games and less time watching video content, like what the NBA could do with 2K.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
for sure. I know firsthand it was definitely a lot easier to be engaged with the NBA when you're kind of playing 2K, you know all the players, you know kind of every team situation, and kind of I know loading into games they would give you updates, kind of talking about the product. So the kind of parallels there and synergies are pretty huge. So definitely something they could capitalize on.
Yeah, and Aaron, something that you kind of touched on a little bit, and that the NBA is probably thinking about more is like international expansion. I'm super curious to learn about your experience, in Argentina, like with working with the NBA. I mean, Enzo is from Brazil. I'm from Mexico. I think when I moved to the United States, the way that I assimilated was through sports, like learning, falling in love with basketball, falling in love with football. The year that I moved to San Antonio, Texas, was when the Spurs won the championship. So it was just surreal. And I thought from that early age, like, oh, my dream job would be to, hopefully one day be like an ambassador for one of these leagues in an international market, right? So how th was that experience for you? And how bullish are you on international expansion for leagues like the NBA?
I mean, I loved getting to work on the NBA's international projects. What becomes clear really quickly is the NBA is the most global sport, the most global sports property in the world when it comes to fandom.
Hmm.
I think there are more basketball fans in China than the US. And so
Wow.
the vast majority of NBA fans around the world are never going to get to go to a game, unfortunately. But meanwhile, they're tuning into highlights on social media. They're watching games on whatever their local network is. They're maybe buying a jersey. They're talking about it with their friends. They're following the league. And so the challenge becomes like, how do you engage those fans? One tactic has been bringing regular and preseason games to those markets. So like the NBA now does games in Mexico, in Abu Dhabi, in London and Paris, in China,
Yeah.
in India, and those have been awesome initiatives. But really, it's about like partnering with local media and sponsorship partners.
Yeah.
Making sure your games are on TV and streaming, making sure that local brands are advertising with your leagues, working with merchandise partners so that people could buy official merchandise in your markets. And I just think there's a lot of meat on the bone for the NBA when it comes to international. It's not easy to set up the
Yeah.
infrastructure in all these different markets, but that's one thing the NBA has going for it. I know it's a big priority for the NFL. They've
For
been
sure.
doing more international games, even though they've struggled a bit more than the NBA to like internationalize their fan base. You see the NHL doing it with their Four Nations competition. The MLB has been doing a lot, especially expanding into Latin America, where so many of their athletes are from. Um,
Yeah.
so this internet, like, there's a good argument for the fact that the American population is a bit saturated when it comes to the big four sports. Now it's
Mm.
like, all right, where do we look internationally?
And where do you think that is? Like realistically, like if you had the keys to the NBA again, like kind of back to that, like is it Latin America? Is it Europe? Like, I mean, obviously like Asia is a huge market. So what do you kind of think like that would be? Does it depend on the league or?
I think it depends on the league. It depends where people are playing your sport, where it resonates with people. Youth participation is arguably the biggest funnel into fandom. So that's why you see like Europe being, or Eastern Europe being a big market for the NBA because so many people play
Yeah.
basketball in Serbia, Lithuania, etc. Um, but I think the NBA right now is focusing a lot on China. They're also focusing a lot on Europe. There have been rumors about them doing some sort of Euro League. Um, but unclear what that would look like. But I think Europe is an especially interesting market. That hasn't been monetized so much by the NBA. I mean, they have offices there and they have media and sponsorship and merchandise deals. They bring games there. But you have these like amazing, like huge brands in the forms of soccer clubs like FC Barcelona and Real Madrid, that are some of the biggest sports brands in the world. And they also have basketball clubs. And
Yeah.
those basketball clubs are really deprioritized because soccer is the focus. But I think there's a lot that the NBA could do with those brands to just like bring more people into like playing, watching basketball, and even bring them over from maybe being an FC Barcelona fan to being a New York Knicks fan.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely think there's a lot of potential there, especially with, like you said, the established fan bases within clubs and kind of the intensity and fervor that the fans have abroad. Definitely spice up the NBA a little bit.
Yeah.
Kind of transitioning back, you kind of mentioned that there's still a lot of meat left on the bones for the NBA. You discuss in your Substack the new deal with OpenAI. Could you just kind of elaborate
Mm.
on that a little bit and kind of where you see the potential with that, and kind of the growth of AI generated content and how that can be monetized to kind of further promote the league?
Yeah, so the inspiration for that article is that a bunch of media companies have licensed their data sets to AI companies for model training. So, what does that look like? It's like the New York Times knowing that they have this huge library of text, or Getty knowing that they have this huge library of stock footage, and knowing that that could be really helpful for an open AI to train their models, whether that's an image model or a text model. And so that got me thinking that the NBA, NFL, all these leagues have huge libraries of video and photo content. Think every single game that's ever been, produced, plus off the court footage, plus like photos of players walking into the locker rooms, walking into the stadiums. Plus, there are dozens and dozens of cameras at every single NBA event. What if you package that all up and sold it to a AI company like an OpenAI or an Anthropic? And so I did some modeling of what the deal size could look like, and then laid out why leagues haven't pursued those opportunities yet. And I think leagues have a lot of they see a lot of risks around branding, around the commercial terms that they would get, around the politics of selling data packages where players or maybe teams might be concerned about how their IP is being used. But the goal of that was really to just be more forward looking. So I think everyone is waiting on like how generative AI is going to change our
Yeah.
world. And it has big implications for media, because just imagine if these AI video models get to a point of full fidelity where you could generate whatever video you want whenever you want. All of a sudden, that has pretty big implications for like sports, which is an industry that's based all around video content. So, I don't know the answers, but the goal was just to do some thinking around it and see what came out of it.
Do you think that is probably the biggest use case as a sports company, like a league or maybe even the team for AI in sports? Or do you think maybe there's like two or three more that you're like, I would also be thinking about these if I was a sports organization?
I don't know the answer because the killer use case hasn't been found yet, but
Right.
I'll tell you a few things that I would pay for. I would pay for a fully realistic video chat with LeBron James. I would pay for it for my birthday. I think that would be awesome. I could get to know him as a dude. We could have a good chat. He could be like, Aaron, I really like your jump shot. It would be awesome. I think that's something that I would pay for. I would pay to watch highlights of LeBron playing one-on-one against Michael Jordan. I think there's a debate around who's the GOAT. I don't think an AI model is going to determine the answer to that, but it would be some pretty entertaining content. And so those are just a few of the things where like the technology isn't quite there yet, but I think as soon as it does get there, there are going to be some pretty interesting consumer applications.
Yeah, 100%. And there's actually a website I think called, you might have seen it, but it's called like three brawn, one blue.com. I might be butchering the name, but you can upload a PDF. And so like kids in middle school, high school will like upload like their notes, and it'll be like LeBron explaining to you like biology and like the
No way.
mitochondria.
You got to send me that website.
Yeah, I will. I will. We'll send it to you after the show. But yeah, like I thought that was super fascinating. I've showed 1,000 people. I think that's super cool. And I guess, Aaron, I guess we're transitioning to the end here of our time. And I'm really curious, you've been so involved with so many, athletes and sports organizations. Like, have you ever been starstruck, Aaron? Like me being in sports, and I mean, you're probably numb to it now, but do you have a story of maybe like meeting, like if you met Shaq, for example, like somebody that you like were obsessed with as a young sports fan? Like, how was that like? Or like, is it something that actually happens to you like today?
I used to be so starstruck. Like I would be obsessed with getting athletes' autographs when I was a kid. And I would literally hide behind my mom and make her ask for the autograph. And she'd be like, come on, Aaron, come out. And so I grew up really starstruck. I think just working in this industry long enough, you lose a little bit of that. And they say never meet your heroes because sometimes they
Yeah.
could disappoint you. But I got the chance to meet Shaq a few years ago at the NBA Finals, and he is one dude who lives up to everything. He is so funny, so charismatic, and that's his reputation like across the industry. It's also why he's so good on TV. He was just the man.
Yeah.
He was absolutely hilarious. Loved the dude. I was like, all right, you were a good idol to have when I was growing up.
How was that interaction? Like, what did you guys talk about?
It was amazing. I was trying to record some content for the NBA's Spanish like social media channels, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I speak fluent Spanish. Don't worry." And he had his friend who's Cuban like stand behind the microphone and speak fluently in Spanish as Shaq like moved his lips, and I was like, "Oh, this dude's absolutely hilarious."
Yeah, that's awesome. And did you tell him like, oh, I was such a big fan of yours, like during, like, the Showtime Lakers and that, or
I didn't because I also needed to do some work with him. I needed to record something with him. And then sometimes there's an element of wanting to play it
right,
cool and be
for sure.
professional. Like at the NBA offices, they would say, if you see players, like probably don't take a photo. But admittedly, people do it because when you meet like someone you've been watching on TV forever and looking up to, sometimes you just gotta snap the photo.
100%. Yeah, don't blame you. And I guess I'll let Enzo ask like any last like questions or thoughts. But
Yeah, I guess kind of lastly, what are some kind of last tidbits of advice, kind of for young professionals? I know you kind of hit on the importance of developing relationships and starting early. If you have any kind of additional tidbits as we kind of wind down the podcast.
I'd give one piece of advice. I think about this a lot. Sports isn't really just don't think if you want to get into sports, sports is a collection of a whole lot of different industries. It's not just one industry. So think of working for a league like the NBA. There's the media rights side. There is the sponsorship and marketing side. There's the content and video and photo production side. Like those are all really different functions. So sometimes people just want to get a job in sports. I would say be really intentional about like what function you want to have at a sports organization. Um, Before you get into it, because sometimes you could get trapped in when your first job out of college might track you in a certain function or like industry. Be really intentional about where you want to end up, and let's say you want to do something like finance or strategy or marketing. Sometimes it's not bad to get experience outside the sports industry and then pivot into it. So I have a lot of friends who maybe did consulting or investment banking for a year, got really good strategy and strategic finance experience, and then moved over to a league for a similar function. I have friends who work at marketing agencies and then moved over to the NBA to do marketing. But once you start those jobs within sports, it's sometimes hard to jump to a completely different function. So just be intentional,
yeah,
and learn as much as possible about those different roles up front.
absolutely. And do you think maybe like a MBA is a good pivot point to try to go into sports? Or how would you like navigate somebody that is trying to like maybe say like, oh, like I don't really like I want to use my MBA specifically to gear my career towards the sports industry?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the MBA. I think everyone has a different thought, and everyone is on their own career journey. But at least the MBA was an experience for me to first personally grow. I think it's just an amazing life experience, but also professionally, you have 2 years to network with a ton of people, just learn a lot about like what a lot of different people do. You learn a lot in classes. You get a really good baseline knowledge of just like business to kind of like be dangerous or a little dangerous at a bit of everything. And if you specifically want to go into sports, like most of the biggest programs have a sports class or two and a professor who will help you network into things. So I'm a really big proponent of the MBA.
Awesome. Yeah. And Aaron, thank you so much. And I guess like last like Mike to you, is there anything you want to shout out like for Will Ventures or for your Tech? Like where can people check you out and get to like read more of your stuff, like get to know more about Will Ventures or
Yeah, check out my Substack, aaronjeremymiller.com. Feel free to subscribe. It's free. There I share takes on, sports, venture capital, investing, just whatever we're looking at. Um, I would say, you know, follow me on LinkedIn, also sharing some content there. And then lastly, I have to shout out my mom just because she'll
yeah,
be
absolutely.
so proud. So yeah, shout out mom.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. We really appreciate you. You were fabulous. We love getting to learn about you, and we'll stay in touch. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.